don't focus on individual level health, and we actually don't even focus on how to cure diseases or treat diseases. We focus on how to prevent them. And in particular in the context of disease, and even more broadly, healthy aging, prevention, it's become increasingly clear, is incredibly important. Trying to eliminate a disease once someone has it is actually much more difficult than trying to eliminate a disease before anyone has it. And in epidemiology and public health, that's what we really focus on, how to stop the disease process before it even starts. And I'm going to show you a few statistics and then introduce you again to some broader picture ideas. So just to start out with a few of the statistics that I think these days we're all becoming increasingly familiar with. The U.S. population, and actually the population in much of the world, is really aging dramatically. If we look back, say over 100 years or so, the proportion of the population that's 65 years or older, it's approximately tripling. And it's happening even more for women than for men. Women do live longer than men, and they continue to live longer than men today as well. And I do work actually, as Brett mentioned, in a study where we only focus on women. We're really most interested in learning about women's health, and given how much longer women live than men, trying to understand how we can keep women healthier throughout their life. Although most of the findings certainly apply to men as well. So just to, again, go through one more statistic, to really emphasize how our population is aging, our life expectancy is increasing, and therefore thinking, really carefully about how we can stay healthy with that extended lifespan is just critical. This figure actually goes all the way back to 1840. And just shows, due to medicine and science, going back, all of that time, life expectancy has been continuously increasing. On average, over every 4 years of time, life expectancy has been increasing for about a year. And the amazing thing is it's not stopping. You would sort of predict at some point you might hit a plateau. But so far that plateau, has not occurred. And despite, the continual aging of our population, we do on average, keep getting older and older. And understanding how to prevent diseases like Alzheimer's disease as we are, all getting older is really one of the critical public health issues of our time. So when I talk about healthy aging, I like to show this little cartoon. This is a physician speaking to his patient, and he says, "Remember the 20 extra years you added to your life through clean, healthy living?" He says, "Well, these are them." And obviously, as you can see, the patient does not look too well. So again, I'm going to really help you think broadly about how to avoid dementia, but as well, how to maintain, really overall health and well-being as we age. I spent, the majority of my career really just focused on dementia and memory disorders and trying to understand, very specifically, how do we prevent, Alzheimer's disease. And then in the last, sort of 5 to 10 years, began really myself to think about it a little more broadly and to appreciate that preventing Alzheimer's disease is essential. But we want to not just prevent Alzheimer's disease, but promote a full life of health and well-being. And part of what got me thinking, about health in Alzheimer's disease, but beyond it as well, was personal too. This is a picture of my family. I have a brother and a sister, and all of our children, and my two parents as well. I'm going to see if I can use my pointer here. The woman on the left is my mom. Maybe you can sort of guess from the picture and all the, incredibly happy, smiling faces surrounding my mom, that she was a great mom for all of us. And she died 2 years ago of Alzheimer's disease. So, I know I share this experience with many, if not most of you in this room. My dad took care of my mom, literally up to the minute that she died. And he was really able to do that because despite her Alzheimer's disease, for many years, the first sort of 8 or so years of her disease course, my mom had, no behavioral issues, she was a happy person. She had good sort of physical function and abilities. She really was able to, mostly take care of herself on a day-to-day basis. Of course not, at the very end. But for a long time after she was diagnosed, she really, despite her memory decline, was able to maintain general sort of health and well-being. And that's what really, for my dad, it was a lifesaver, and of course for all of us as well, although mostly for my dad as her primary caretaker. And for me, that really helped hit home the importance of researching not only memory decline, but, that those broader aspects of mental health, physical function, and well-being, and trying to understand how we can preserve, all of those things. So I'm going to talk a bit about the research that I've been doing on, this broad concept of healthy aging. And, it certainly includes cognitive function or memory, and how we prevent memory decline as we age, but simultaneously incorporates other aspects of health and daily living. So how do we maintain mental health or avoid depression? How do we maintain physical function or our ability each day to take care of ourselves and get around? And then in addition, how do we generally avoid chronic diseases? For example, the heart disease and cardiovascular disease, which we really know now contributes to memory decline as well, and other diseases such as cancers. So the focus of the results that I'll be talking about from our research is how can we, prevent all of these things and really promote healthy aging. So I'll start out by telling you a bit, Brad mentioned, so I have worked with the Nurses' Health Study for about 25 years now. It was, truly one of the original studies of women's health. The study includes over 120,000 female nurses, and it began in 1976. This was way before women's health even existed. The person who started this study actually realized in the early 1970s, as sort of the sexual revolution was in full swing, and more young women were taking birth control pills, which especially at that time had very high doses of estrogen and hormones. And he kind of uniquely realized that we were now facing, a whole country full of relatively young women taking very high doses of hormones for years at a time, and that it was essential to track their health and see, even if at younger ages taking those oral contraceptive pills, was good and prevented unwanted pregnancies, but he felt we needed to track those women and see if the oral contraceptive pills or the birth control pills might actually have health effect decades later. So he was interested in doing, a very large population study, which, would last for decades. So his original idea actually was to study doctors' wives. And this was because he had recently been in England, and in England at the time there was a very famous study called the British Doctor Study, which was actually the study that first discovered the harms of cigarette smoking. So he said, well, I'm going to do a study of doctors' wives. And part of the reason of looking for a medical population was to help him do a study this big. To study 120,000 people is not an easy thing to do. And in the study, he wanted to do completely by mail. So the participants would get a mailed questionnaire, answer questions about their lifestyle and their health, and send the questionnaire back. And having a medicalized population could really help facilitate that because they could report their health and lifestyle kind of better than an average person. So he got, there are published lists of physicians in the country. So he sent those physicians a questionnaire and asked them to give it to their wives. And the questionnaires came back. And then through the questionnaires, he got the wives' information. And then sent out a second set of questionnaires directly to the wives. And it turned out most of the wives said, I never saw a questionnaire before. What do you mean you're sending me the second one? And it turned out, perhaps not surprisingly, that the physicians had all filled out the questionnaire for their wives because, of course, they knew better than their wives the answers. So it was actually at that point that he said, all right, I'm going to study nurses. Let's just go directly to the source. So the Nurses' Health Study has literally been ongoing since 1976. And it actually really was, prescient to study nurses. They do know a lot about their own health, and they also understand the importance of health research. So literally, now over 40 years later, we still have like 90% participation of those original 120,000 women. They've just been amazing, and literally every 2 years for the last 40 years have told us, all kinds of things about their lifestyle, their diet, and of course, their health. And this includes doing, we actually do cognitive assessments in the women by telephone. So we call them and we administer a battery of neuropsychologic assessments so that we can track their cognitive function and changes in memory as well. We actually have blood samples from the women, and again, since they're nurses, we literally sent them in the mail a blood collection kit, had them ask one of their colleagues to draw their blood, and they FedExed it back to us. So we literally have freezers filled with hundreds of thousands of blood samples, which we collected without ever seeing the participants. So it has been really an amazing study with so much information. This is a way we collect the information from the women. So every 2 years they get a questionnaire, that looks like those SAT forms that some of us may remember. And we really, we pack the questionnaires full of information so that we really can understand and track the women's lives and lifestyle and health, starting out when they were in their 30s and now they're into their 80s and 90s. I mentioned that an important reason for focusing on nurses was the quality of information they could provide, and we've actually over time sort of tested it. Not just said I think they have good quality data, but actually testing it. So just as an example, we do ask them every 2 years for their weight, since we know that is important to track to understand health. And you might guess that lots of people, especially women, might not be willing to report their weight very accurately. But we actually, after we sent out the questionnaire and got them back, asked some of the local nurses to come into our office so we could actually weigh them. So we brought kind of a random sample into our offices, weighed them ourselves, and we found a 90% correlation between the weight on the questionnaire and their actual weight when we weigh them ourselves. As another example, we do quite a lot of work in diet, and I'll actually share some of that work with you tonight. So we ask them about, foods and dietary supplements containing, this is just an example, vitamin E, and then we use the blood samples we have to measure levels of vitamin E. And there we found, again, 80% correlation between their reported diet and supplement use and their levels of vitamin E in their blood. As an example of a specific disease, when we compare the women reporting type 2 diabetes on their questionnaire we then asked them for medical records, we found 98% of the women who told us they had diabetes, we were able to confirm it through their medical records. So they really just provide a tremendous amount of accurate and valuable information. All right, so now just to get a little bit into the research and the results. So again, we look simultaneously at these 4 major aspects of health and aging. So in order to be considered a healthy ager, we came up with a pretty strict definition. So you had to make it into your 70s with no major chronic diseases at all. So no cardiovascular disease, no cancer, no diabetes, no neurologic diseases. As I mentioned, we did administer telephone memory tests, so you also had to have a good score on the memory test. We do the telephone interview of cognitive status, which is pretty similar to the mini mental state exam. We also ask a number of questions to assess physical function, or your ability to take care of yourself, to do your food shopping, carry your groceries, dress yourself, bathe yourself. So you had to have good physical function, and then finally, good mental health. And there we used a measure of depression, so no signs of depression. So we focused our research on the women who had, none of these issues at all into their 70s. And then we compared the women who had, truly no dementia, no memory decline, no depression, and good, physical function or physical abilities. And we compared those women to the women who had issues with any of these. We did find, given the strict definition, only about 10% of the women in the population were able to achieve, this truly, super healthy aging. But still, trying to understand what those women did throughout their life to end up with, such a super healthy aging condition, really can teach us a lot about our lifestyle and what we can do to stay healthy as we get older. We did do, kind of an interesting comparison. At the same time that we assessed sort of healthy aging and usual aging, we also asked the women to overall tell us about their self-rated health. So just a simple question, overall, do you think you have good health? Because we're interested in knowing, do people who have, no diseases at all actually feel healthy as well? And we did see, overall, pretty good relations, although, I think the most interesting part is actually at the bottom. So the best correlation was for physical function. So the women who had good physical function, they could take care of themselves, they could walk, they could do their food shopping. The ones who had good physical function, 80% of them said they felt like they had overall good health. I know the interesting one actually was on the memory side. So if you look, towards the bottom, on the cognitive function, so the women who scored high on the memory test, actually only about half of them felt that they were in generally good health, which wasn't far from the women who didn't score as well. Amongst the women who didn't score as well on the memory tests, 40% felt that they were actually in overall good health. It's hard to totally explain it, but incredibly interesting observation that it does seem like, for these women at least, that their, sort of ability to get around physically seemed to be more important to them in terms of rating their own health than their memory. And, obviously, none of these women had, dementia yet. All right, so now I will get into some of our results. So when we first started this research, we simply looked at body mass index, or generally our weight, and trying to understand how maintaining your weight might influence healthy aging. And we actually just looked at weight in midlife. So we looked at the women's weight when they were in their 50s and early 60s to try to see when they were in their 70s, how does their weight predict healthy aging. So in this graph, at the bottom, so the bottom is increasing categories of BMI, starting here at pretty low BMI, and rising up to, this category of 30 or more is obesity. And then these circles represent your likelihood of healthy aging. So basically, what this shows is that the women with the lowest BMI in middle age had the highest likelihood of healthy aging. And that very steadily, as BMI increased, their likelihood of healthy aging decreased. And there's a few really interesting parts to these data. And one of them is, how incredibly steady this relationship is. I mean, with each jump in increasing BMI, you get a similar jump in decreasing likelihood of healthy aging. So, you could look at this in a slightly pessimistic way, thinking, how bad it is to be way down here and to be obese. But actually, I think the positive part of this message actually is how steady this line here is. Meaning that even if, you have the worst likelihood of healthy aging over here if you're obese, but even if you lose a little bit of weight and can get into the next lower category, your odds of healthy aging are going to come up. And, that's true of virtually whatever category of BMI you're in. If you can just lose a little bit of weight, that's going to push up your likelihood of healthy aging. So you don't have to think about, massively changing your body mass index, but just appreciate that with each decrease in weight, you're increasing your likelihood of achieving healthy aging. So we also naturally looked at physical activity. We have asked the women, basically every 2 years, 2 to 4 years, about their physical activity levels. We asked about a whole range of activities, from running to stair climbing, to a whole variety of different sports. And we actually sort of rank how intense each of these sports is. And basically, the more intense sport you do, the more points you get. As you might expect, we also measure walking. The vast majority of women in the cohort have walking as their primary physical activity. So I'm actually going to show you the results for all physical activity, but then I'll also focus just on walking, because it is really by far the most common type of exercise that most people do. So again, across the bottom are different categories of exercise. And here, the bigger the number, the more exercise is represented. So we're moving from the least active women up until the most active women. And again, each of these circles represents your odds of healthy aging. And here, as you might expect, we see the complete opposite pattern as we saw for body mass index. Now, the more the women exercise, the greater their likelihood of healthy aging. And again, although it's not quite as neat a pattern as BMI, it still is suggesting, that similar, it's not that the only benefits are for the women who exercise the most. The more you exercise, the more benefits you get. So again, wherever you're at, increasing a little bit can be very helpful. And these were now, we did look very specifically just at walking because it is, so by far the most common activity. And we did still see, pretty similar results. So the women are organized by how much walking they do from the least to the most. And in general, again, we see these circles increasing. So the more the women are walking, the higher their odds of achieving healthy aging. So we also do a lot of work in our study on eating. And actually, most of the time you read in the newspaper, what you should be eating and what you shouldn't be eating, it often comes from our research. We actually, so every 4 years, for the last 40 years, we've asked the women about what they eat, so that we can really track their diet and changes in their diet and understand how that's related to aging. So we actually create a score for overall diet pattern. We call it the Healthy Eating Index, and it includes 11 components. Vegetables, fruits, whole grains, nuts, omega-3 fats, and that's mostly fish, and polyunsaturated fats, which is another kind of the healthy fat. The negative dietary components are sugar-sweetened beverages, which is mostly soda, fruit juice, sort of red or processed meat, trans fat, and sodium. So we look at the women's intake of all these 11 different food categories, and then we give them a score based on how much or how little of that food they eat. So we put the score together, so 11 components. Each of them can get up to 10 points. And then we score the women from 0 to 110, where 0 is the absolute worst diet, and 110 is a virtually perfect diet, meaning you have lots, high consumption of good foods and low consumption of bad foods. And again, we looked at how that diet patterns related to healthy aging. So again, on the bottom is women's rankings from the worst diet to the best diet. And you can see again that these circles are generally rising. So the women up here who have healthier diets also have healthier odds, or higher odds of achieving healthy aging. So it does seem pretty clear that a good diet pattern is really critical to avoiding dementia, avoiding depression, avoiding most major chronic diseases, and maintaining your physical function. So all these nice pretty colors actually represent another type of nutrient called flavonoids. Flavonoids have become increasingly interesting lately. A lot of the work you've heard about, the red wine has lots of flavonols. Flavonols are kind of vitamins which help decrease oxidation and also inflammation. There are a number of different kinds of flavonols, and here this tells you, these are the primary foods which give you this vitamin called flavonoids. So it's foods that you do hear about a lot, such as red wine. In particular, berries have high levels of flavonoids, and we've heard for a while about how like blueberries may be good for your brain. And so these are the 4 primary kinds of flavonols, and in particular, this row at the bottom is for those berries. The specific type of flavanols called anthocyanins is the ones that you primarily get through blueberries and strawberries. So the foods that have flavanols, like red wine, blueberries, strawberries, did also seem to increase the odds of healthy aging. So I will say, actually, I mean, there's really interesting evidence on the blueberries. You know, for healthy aging, we actually also have looked at blueberries and strawberries, and specifically at memory and memory disorders. And the blueberries do seem to be quite good. So much that I actually now eat blueberries every single day. And it's also incredibly easy and good. You know, we do hear a lot about moderate alcohol as well. So we have looked at the relationship of moderate alcohol, you know, both to dementia as well as to overall healthy aging. And we do see incredibly consistent results that moderate alcohol intake, you know, does prevent memory decline. And here you can see as well, you know, up until here, so this category, you know, is the equivalent of about 1 to 2 drinks per day. You do see steadily increasing odds of healthy aging. So keeping it moderate, so that meaning again about 1 to 2 drinks per day on average, you know, does seem to provide quite a lot of, you know, memory as well as general health benefits. We have actually looked extensively at the type of alcohol. You know, there is this thought actually that it's, you know, red wine is where most of the benefit is, and that actually does not seem to be true. It really does seem to be the alcohol, and the red wine benefits seem to be mostly because the French are just good at marketing. So whatever alcohol you like, as long as you stick to around 1 or so drinks, it really does seem to provide some memory and health benefits. So another dietary area, you know, we've become really interested in recently is nuts. You know, you do hear more and more about it. We've looked, you know, we look at women who have no nut intake. We look at any nuts, and actually, we've been looking recently specifically at walnuts. So walnuts do have a little bit different nutrient composition than some of the other nuts. So we have also been looking specifically at walnuts, and again, we've done this both for memory as well as, you know, here for overall healthy aging. You know, and again, the results are just incredibly consistent. You know, that any kind of nuts, but, you know, actually even more in particular walnuts, really do seem to help maintain memory and help maintain overall health and well-being with aging. You know, and then, you know, similar to the blueberries, you know, another really nice thing about nuts is, you know, how easy it is to incorporate into your lifestyle. You know, some of the other foods that are healthy, people simply don't like as much. But, you know, eating a little bit of nuts each day tends to be a rather simple dietary change that people can make. So I'm going to kind of switch to another research area that we've been doing a lot of work on lately that has actually become like one of my favorite research topics lately. So we've been thinking a lot about how people's, you know, sort of attitudes may influence their health. You know, you do read more and more about it in the newspaper, you know, things like loneliness and how that could impact your health. So, you know, there's quite a lot of, you know, sort of psychological constructs that represent people's behavior. We've actually been focused on optimism. And in fact, optimism does seem to be the area where there's the most consistent research. So optimism, specifically, the definition is expecting positive outcomes in the future. And interestingly, there's actually a pretty simple test that you can give people to measure their levels of optimism. And if you want, you can kind of answer these questions as you're sitting there. So the test is called the Life Orientation Test. It's actually just 6 questions. And so we have the women in the study answer these 6 questions. And based on their answers, so for each question, you get 5 possible response options, ranging from disagree strongly to agree strongly. And then you get points based on how you answered each question, from 1 to 5. So the questions are actually fairly basic. Things like, in uncertain times, I usually expect the best. And they're worded, some of them positively and some of them negatively as well, as well as the opposite. If something can go wrong with me, it will. So again, so on our questionnaires, we've got, 100,000 women who have answered, these 6 items. And then we've taken the women and ranked them based on their level of optimism. Before I give you the answers, I'm just going to tell you, a little bit more about how we think about it. So, you have people with ranges of optimism, and if you really think, you can actually, see all the ways that your behavior and your attitude could influence your health. So as one example, more optimistic people, tend to be less stressed. When stressful things happen to them, they generally react in a more positive or resilient way. So optimism can help them buffer stress and the impact stress may have on their health. In addition, you could also see that more optimistic people have better health behaviors. So all the things I've been talking about until now, like exercising more, having a healthier diet, you could easily imagine that if you're a more optimistic person, you're more likely to live a generally healthy lifestyle. So, you can think about the combination of less stress, healthier lifestyles, and then leading up to overall better health, especially as we get older. Now, the really interesting thing about optimism is you do seem to be able to change people's level of optimism. So there's been research, which, starts out with whatever optimism level people have, and then interventions are given. So these interventions include things like, pretty simple options, like asking people every night to write down 5 things they're grateful for. Asking people to, sort of count their blessings each day for a set period of time. And it actually has been shown that if you get people, thinking more about all of the good or positive things that happen to them, you can make them a little bit more optimistic. So, thinking broadly about health, it becomes a potentially really fascinating way we could make people healthier. So, you don't have to give them pills all the time. You just have to tell them to be a little more grateful. And obviously that's kind of a simplistic way of looking at it. But, and this research really is still in its infancy. But, I think there actually is the potential, that we could find, really alternate ways of trying to keep people healthy, besides, the kinds of medical interventions that we tend to think about. So I'm going to first, I'm going to show you some of our broad results first. So we did simply look at optimism and lifespan. So we categorized the women by their level of optimism. So the least optimistic through to the women who scored the highest. And again, we saw this really steady relationship. So the more optimistic you are, the longer you lived. Such that the women who had the highest level of optimism, on average, lived 15% longer than the women who had the least levels of optimism, which is a pretty powerful overall effect. And the optimism we had measured, again, when the women were in middle age. So it wasn't that the women who started to become unhealthy became less optimistic. We looked at optimism levels at much younger ages, and they still were incredibly strong predictors of lifespan. So we did also look specifically at healthy aging. So not just how long you live, but can you live without dementia, with good physical function, and without depression? So along the bottom, this is increasing levels of optimism, and pretty steady, increasingly likely to have healthy aging. So not just a longer lifespan, but a healthier lifespan. And again, this research is still, quite new, and we still have a lot to learn. But to me, it's a really nice sort of, refreshing way to think about things we can do to stay healthy. And, of course, trying to think about it in, the simplest ways we can. Not complicated messages, but, pretty simple interventions, that all of us might be able to adapt pretty easily, so that we can avoid Alzheimer's disease and live long and healthy lives. So, just to summarize, it was quite a lot of information. But again, really trying to think in the big picture, avoiding Alzheimer's disease, but simultaneously maintaining health and well-being as we all get older, is critical for ourselves as individuals and obviously critical for our entire population. As I showed, from looking at, so many different behaviors, from how much we weigh, to what we eat, to our exercise levels, there's really a lot of evidence that pretty basic lifestyle factors and behaviors and attitudes can influence an incredibly wide range of health factors, from memory to mental health to physical function, and really most of the chronic diseases that affect us. And, as I noted, for almost all of the behaviors and other lifestyle factors, relationships were really, it was stepped relationships. So it's not that, from today to tomorrow, you need to dramatically change your lifestyle or your attitude, but every incremental change comes with incremental benefits. So it really is a nice individual as well as public health level message, that small changes in our diet, our physical activity, our weight, and potentially our ability to have positive attitudes could really have, tremendous and long-term influences on our health as we get older, and help us avoid, the real plague that dementia is, as well as all of the other things that go along with it, like staying healthy and avoiding depression. So hope that was a fairly positive message, but there really is, a lot that we each can do, to help ourselves and to help everyone around us.